I am awake once again at nighttime, an occurrence that is likely to increase, uh, although I'm not sure for how long, given that I took a long nap today, a nap of exactly 3 hours, and I woke up feeling all jumbled and weird, and I had some tea, which is not something I usually do after naps. Usually I just deal with the fallout of having napped. But I did it in this case, and it's had me very energized, which leads me to believe that I will be on a nocturnal sleep schedule once again, which is totally fine. But hopefully, I'll start to stabilize my sleep a little bit after becoming nocturnal because usually my sleep is more consistent and stable when I'm sleeping during the daytime. But I digress. Recently, I landed on one of these yet again. This is the exact same model and color that I once had, a Nintendo Switch. Something that I'm very excited to have. I haven't had one of these things in a couple years now. I sold mine back before I moved to Wyoming when I was selling a bunch of stuff so I could have some money before I went there. And of course, those of you who watched my channel at the time know that the Wyoming arc was a massive failure. Uh, it did not go so well for me having that job at that hotel, but that is a different story for a different day. I felt that it wasn't a huge loss at the time, given that I did not have very many Switch games. Most of the Switch games I owned were just remasters or ports of games from the Xbox 360. And the reason for this was because the vast majority of Switch games at that time were exceedingly expensive, prohibitively expensive, and I just didn't want to deal with all that. So I was like, yeah, this is kind of my miniature Fortnite machine, but if I really want to play that game, I have the ability to do so on the PlayStation 4. And so I sold my Switch Lite at the time for a little bit less than I paid for it, but I continued to miss that little thing for a while after. With the Switch 2 coming out now, they're significantly more affordable, and they were already the most affordable option for to play Switch games. So I was like, "Fuck it, I'm going all in on this. I'm getting one of these things again." So that's what I did, um, and it feels very nice to have one in my hands yet again because it reminds me of a comfy time in my life, which is funny because I remember when I first got mine, I was doing videos on it, or I would do videos of me playing it, or I would stream it as I was talking about other subjects. And I remember in one video, I talked about the re-releases of these games from the 360, and how it made me feel nostalgic for that time. And I remember my friend Miranda left this funny comment at the time that was quite long, as her comments usually are. This was back in, was this 2019 or it was 2020 because I was doing my daily video thing for the month of January that year. She left this long comment, essentially arguing that consoles from the sixth generation can't be nostalgic because they're not old enough yet to be nostalgic. But here I was, uh, a brand new adult of 18 years, enjoying my nostalgia for those consoles. So it was kind of an interesting back and forth to have. But needless to say, it was a prominent emotion for me, having played the Switch at the time, and that time in general was extremely comfy for me because a certain plague from a certain country was ravaging the world, and as a result, there was an influx of cash going to just about everyone at the time, which made life a lot more comfy. It made the stresses of the world a lot less noticeable. You know, it was a not to say I was super stressed about money and stuff to begin with, despite coming from a poor family and a poor household, but that economic help definitely was of great comfort, let's say. And so at the same time that everybody else was online more often, and so there was more company on the internet, at the same time that all of this new content was coming out online because so many more people were in their house. At the same time that the news was quite entertaining just because so many different things were happening. Uh, and at the same time that I had this brand new Switch, which allowed me to kind of be a part of the meta of modern consoles and that whole generation. Um, I was feeling, you know, jubilant and nostalgic to re-experience some of these video games from my childhood, and it was at this point that I started to form new memories that I would come to be nostalgic about later. Now it's 5 years later, almost six. We're coming up on 2026 now. I know it's crazy, but we are 5 years later, and here I am finding myself nostalgic for that state of joy, that animated state that I was in 5 years ago, where I happen to have been nostalgic for things from about 5 years ago. It's very bizarre. It's a very bizarre situation to be in. But needless to say, I have found myself filled with these emotions, and I took the dive. I jumped on it, as sometimes we say in the video game collecting sphere, and headed over to a place where I could get a Nintendo Switch, that place being called the Internet. And I landed on a used one in good condition for about $90, 80, 85. No, it was 90 with tax. Um, and here we are. Here we are. I am enjoying myself yet again. But you know, um, it's interesting because I only have one game left from that period of time. The game that I have is the Toho shooting game where like you're running around in a 3D space. I believe it originally was a Dojin game. It was made by some fan, which I haven't been playing at all because I got my fill of that around the time. I think around the time it came out, I was playing that, but whatever. Um, so I've been playing Fortnite portably, which is it's just so comfy because yeah, sure I can play it on my TV. Um, you know, I can have all that out on the big screen or whatever and kind of sit on my bed and look all the way over here, which is fine. I play a lot of games that way, but there's just something so comfy about I almost dropped this shit. That would have been terrible. But about literally just having it like this, and you see everything that's going on, and you're cranking 90s, you're having fun. I don't know. There's something very comforting about it, and it's odd, especially considering like the level of investment I have in this hobby. The fact that I know so many obscure games across literally every generation and have enjoyed a great many of them. The fact that I can extract this much joy from a game as mainstream and simple as Fortnite, I think is kind of funny. It's kind of bizarre. Typically, you know, the hardcore crowd is going to look at that and scoff. They will look at me with disappointment, but it's a fun game. You know, I will never take this one lying down. That it's a fun game. Um, I'll bet my life on it. And at the end of the day, um, I find myself having these very comfy experiences, just laying in bed like I was, you know, 5 years ago, um, playing these kind of these games that you're sort of losing yourself in. The mind is occupied, and you don't have all those crazy memories and bizarre things flooding into your head from the past, which is a topic that I touched on in in my last video, where I talked about my difficulty sleeping. And one of the principal issues that I touched on was this issue of painful memories from the past coming back, and me having to re-experience them, which keeps me awake at night. The great thing about video games as a hobby for me is that they allow me to just enter a state of full focus where those memories never come to haunt me. I never have flashbacks when I'm playing a video game. I never, drop out of it, or start feeling start feeling pain when I am playing a video game, and it's very comforting. I actually did a written video about exactly this back in 2017, if you can believe it. I did a video called something along the lines of the joy of hard video games, or why hard games are good. I don't remember the exact title, but you can find it in my written videos playlist, scripted videos playlist. And in that video, I talked about exactly this. I talked about this dynamic I have existed under pretty much my whole life, where I remember these painful things all the time, and being able to just put myself into a video game where I'm being challenged, where my mind is active, really helps me, and it's something I really like about shooters in particular, because, when you're playing online in a competitive manner, you really have to just fully focus on what you're doing, and have to make sure that you are the one that wins and not the other, and so it's something really to get lost in, and I have that with pretty much every genre of game. Even with RPGs, I actually don't. I'm trying to think if, yeah, even with turn-based RPGs, which is a genre I like. There are games that I like from that genre, but I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite genres. But yeah, even though overall, those games are a bit more boring or whatever. I still have that experience with them. I was trying to think, yeah, because when I played through Nocturne, when I played through Disgaea, there was not a moment when I was just, when these dangerous moments from the past entered my mind. So I find video games extremely therapeutic. For PTSD, I find I find it also a comforting way to engage with my past, because they have been a staple of my life, a through line by which all of the different periods of my life are connected, and during all of those times, they have been an immense source of comfort. I was raised on video games. I was practically born with them, because I started playing when I was 2, and I grew into adulthood with video games. And during the times in which I have played them the least, with the exception, this is interesting, with the exception of this recent period of my life where I've just put everything into language learning, with the exception of that time, well, really, it's ongoing, so this time, they have been this extremely comforting staple of my life that has just anchored me, to reality, and kept me really thinking, okay, this is worth it, when during the times when I didn't play them all that much were the times when I was the most miserable. And there's a lesson there, you know. It's to stay connected with your hobbies. Obviously, don't, you know, just ignore all of your problems and go into them 100% without ever addressing, you know, the things in your life that may be causing you to feel this way. But it's good to have an outlet for, you know, 1 hour here, 2 hours there. Um, you know, it's good to have that thing that you are spending time on to just have fun, to just purely um, have something that you can enjoy yourself without it being about work, you know. And if you can do it with friends, all the better. You know, I was playing Fortnite with my sister just earlier today. And I think that's super important, you know, to have somebody next to you that you're talking with and that you're enjoying the activity with. That's also extremely important. But as a solo activity as well, you know, to just get lost in a world for, you know, a determined period of time and then, you know, log out and kind of focus on the rest of the things you have to do that day. It's a good way to remind yourself that there are positive feelings that can be experienced in this world, and that, you know, it's not all dark and gray. You know, you have the ability to push forward, and there are things that are actually worth pushing forward for. And I find it extremely important to have passions, especially passions that generate these kinds of emotions, you know, like a feeling of comfort, a feeling of nostalgia, a feeling of of really gratitude just to exist, you know. Um, and that's how the hobby should be experienced. I think there is such a thing as overindulgence. You know, you have the crowd that maybe they just play one game and they play it for 14 hours a day, and they've got a fucking extra screen over here on the side with YouTube playing or whatever, and they're just overstimulating their mind 24/7. That to me seems really unhealthy. Um, I've always been terrified of like developing something akin to ADHD, because whenever those people tell me about their experiences with that, like people who actually have it, my first reaction to just hearing them tell me about what it's like to be them is I would literally kill myself. I would literally kill myself if I had to live with that. I don't understand how people do it. It's just like such an alien way of existing for me. The concept of it, you know, it just sounds so miserable. Um, and so, like, the idea of doing something that could put me on that trajectory, that could, like, simulate the experience of becoming like that, of being like that, excuse me, is just so terrifying to me. And so I don't do that shit with the fucking, I've got on this screen one thing, I've got on this screen one thing, I've got on this screen another thing. That to me just seems like dopamine overload. It seems extraordinarily dangerous. And I've literally never met someone happy who spends all day like that. Not once. And so, you know, important. Actually, maybe Idle Neat, because he has multiple monitors. That guy seems pretty happy. But, so he might be the exception. But, yeah, I don't know, man. I completely lost the thread here. I started talking about my fear of ADHD, and not being able to focus as well as in the past. Which, by the way, is one of the reasons why I would describe myself as fairly anti-drug, because the idea of of developing like cognitive problems that are avoidable, and not being able to enjoy things as much as one used to, not being able to focus as well as one used to due to brain damage or down regulation of certain endogenous chemicals. That is such a terrifying idea to me. And I wrote a whole blog post about this on my blog, osakasyndrome.bearblog.dev. called Drugs Are Lame. And I cite a lot of sources, academic sources, for my claims. If you haven't read it, I think you would like it. But um, that's another, that's another position I find myself in, just, not wanting to consume anything that would damage my mind, because aside from not being able to focus as well and such, um, I view that as intrinsically linked to not being able to enjoy myself as much, right? Because the things that I enjoy the most, and so much of like how I derive enjoyment from them, is just from this experience of immersion, just feeling like I am literally there in whatever I'm doing and nothing else comes to my mind. It's like this flow state. That is the best feeling in the world to me. And the idea of not being able to get that as much, either because I'm scrolling through social media all the time, or doing something much worse like consuming weed or alcohol, um, or even down to, like I said, things like listening to a podcast in the background while playing a game, or things like having two monitors. I will never do these things because I don't want to damage my ability to focus and to you know to be immersed in the worlds that I'm trying to explore. And so um, I do feel very nostalgic for these individual games and times that I had, that general period of time where I was very much into the Nintendo Switch. At that time, and this is the other thing, these memories don't just stand out in my mind because I remember everything. Well, I do. But they also stand out in my mind because the emotions that I felt were so strong, and it really felt like just exactly what I needed back then. Because back then, I had my consoles. I had a TV in my room, an old one, and I used them, but um, I didn't really have a way to play the modern stuff. I remember when I bought a PS4 in 2019 with my own money, by the way. Like, I was super chatted enough on my old live streams to actually buy a PS4, and I bought a PS4. And back then, my dad just came into my room and took it out of the room and then put it in his room. And then he started using it all the time, and I basically never used it again after that. I used it to play through Watch Dogs, like once, and that was specifically when he wasn't around in there, because he was off doing something else with other people, um, over a period of over a period of a couple days. And aside from that, I literally never used it again after that. I have it now because he bought he bought an Xbox later, and I got my PS4 back. I actually bought another PS4 eventually at one point, because I still hadn't gotten mine back, and I was just like, I was a baller back then because I had crypto cash, and I was just like, fuck it, man. I want a PS4 again. Um, and I got one back then. But at this time, I was very poor, and I didn't have a connection to the modern line of consoles. Um, I didn't even have a good computer at the time that could play games. I ended up being gifted one um, later that year, much later that year, um, in 2020. But I did not have a proper stable console, or anything to connect me to all the things that were coming out. But I was hyped about the things that were coming out. And so here was an affordable way to actually experience some of these next gen stories and titles with ports that were surprisingly well made. This is the other thing that I really like about the Switch, is that even though the hardware is comparable to the 360 or PS3, I would say it's like a souped up version of one of those consoles. You know, it's slightly more powerful, but because it was so popular, developers were willing to optimize their games as well as they possibly could to maintain 30 FPS or even crack, 60 in some crazy cases with these modern titles that looked surprisingly good. Sure, maybe they didn't look great if you had it plugged up to, an OLED UHD TV with a huge screen or something. But on the handheld, like one of these things, on just a normal HD screen, that shit looked pretty good. And somehow they were able to optimize these ports as well as they possibly could to run on such low powered hardware, and in many cases to run well and to look pretty good. They may have had some problems with textures at times. Textures not looking the best in certain respects, but they had to make sacrifices on some individual things. But often the things that they would choose would be very creative. Changing the grass here or changing, something about how like the enemies pop in. I used to watch a bunch of Digital Foundry videos about this stuff. I don't remember all the specifics because that's a little above my pay grade. But it is interesting to me that at a time when it seemed like programmers were becoming lazy, developers were becoming lazy, when it seemed like, okay, because we have such powerful hardware now, we can just sort of wing it and it's fine, if things don't run all that well when they could run better, it's like we've got a lot of CPU, we'll make it work. We'll manage. But with the Nintendo Switch, you couldn't afford to just manage, or else you're gonna be playing a game at 10 FPS, and so what they managed to do to deliver games that for them ideally would sell as much as possible, which is part of why there was this focus on excellence. They had a large market of consumers that they wanted to sell as many copies of these games as possible to, and so they put in the work with dedicated developers that were able to optimize things as much as possible to produce some truly astounding ports, ports that took advantage of absolutely every aspect of the hardware as possible. And so while people at the time would clown on a lot of these ports and, oh, it's the poor people's way to play these games or whatever, it really wasn't anything to clown on, because given what they were working with, it was truly special, some of the things that they were able to achieve. And I've always really liked that in the world of video gaming. I have a number of PlayStation 2 ports over there of games that were literally released on the newer gen consoles at the time, the 360 and whatnot. But these ports were surprisingly well made. And they really pushed the hardware to its absolute limits. I bought those ports in the past because I wanted to play them and experience the games as they were at the time, to kind of get a better understanding of the meta of that particular era, and really see all the different ways in which they pushed the hardware to its absolute limits. I find that fascinating. I find it fascinating, the process of optimizing games and developing them, And to go through these different ports from different times that were able to produce truly impressive results is something I find very fun. And it's one of the big appeals of the Switch for me because while it may sound silly, that I would like to play, um, the lower quote unquote lower quality versions of various games, on a lower powered system than its contemporaries, than its rivals. I think it starts to make sense when you consider the fact that I am playing these, and I'm not just observing the game as is and enjoying the game as is. Of course I am, but as well I am viewing it in this broader context. I'm noticing all these different things about the foliage, the lighting, the frame rate, the things that they were able to achieve, given the limitations that they had. I find that all so interesting. And it's something that brings me great joy as I'm playing a game. And it brings me great joy even to just think about it or to hear other people talk about it, and especially to talk about it myself, with the camera, but even more so with others. And isn't that what this is all about? It, Finding community, experiencing joy in things that we can see ourselves in, things that for whatever reason, are able to pique our interest and inspire us to think and to feel. I don't know, it's just something profoundly important to me. And I find it in all the consoles that I have, and all of the games that I've played, and all the discussions that I've had about this beautiful, truly beautiful medium. And it's one of the many things that I feel thankful for in this life, and that truly makes me feel thankful for being alive, to have been born on this planet, that it is a place where I can enjoy all of these things that may appear simple at first glance, but when you start peeling back those layers, you find so many different things to think about and feel about. And I don't know. I I I just feel really happy being able to live in the era that I live in, with so many titles at my disposal, so many experiences that I have gotten to have and that are left to be had. And that's why picking up something like this and looking at it, um, ends up generating quite a lot for me to say, because it's about a lot more than just this. It's about the time and place when I first picked up this. It's about the cultural meta that and the work that was involved in creating this. It's about what the titles that were available for this meant at that particular time, and how we can think about them in the context of that technology, and in the broader cultural context of that moment. Because again, this was at lazy millennial devs. These were quote unquote lazy millennial devs that were known for their mediocrity. All of a sudden, you saw the return of optimization in programming and game dev, and that was probably the last time we're ever going to see that, because now the Switch 2 is out and the hardware is significantly more powerful. Probably going to be already less powerful than the PS5, and definitely is going to be less powerful than the PlayStation 6, but it doesn't matter because it's comparable enough. And changes in hardware, aren't all that rapid anymore. There aren't these big jumps between generations anymore. So there's not going to be this necessity for major optimization, to make these ports run well, and to have them do what they need to do. And so really what we got with this thing was the last console that incentivized developers to push boundaries and to challenge themselves and to optimize as much as possible. I wish the incentives were in place for people to do that on the consoles that are, in line with this generation's hardware. That are, very very capable. Imagine, if optimization were kept in mind, and they worked very hard at just squeezing out every single little bit of juice that they could out of that chipset. Imagine what we might see. But of course, that is a laborious process and takes a lot of time, and you need people who are very skilled to be able to do that. And given the fact that we continue moving toward more powerful hardware that is like ridiculously powerful at times, there is simply no incentive to actually push boundaries in that way. You can just take out the newest version of Unreal, and there you go. Which is a total disaster, by the way. I do not like how games that are made in the latest Unreal engine look. But basically every game is made in that engine, which kind of sucks. Yeah, that's the other thing too. What happened to people making their own engines when they made games? I know nowadays it would be very complicated and expensive to have to do that every time, just given how complex games are. But where'd that go? It was. I feel like you would end up with more innovative experiences at that time, when it was more the common thing to just make a new engine with every new game. I don't know, but I'm trying to tour my memory for a moment, so to say, uh, to see if there was anything else that I wanted to mention in this video. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it is basically everything. I have very comfy, warm memories in my bed, sometimes under my covers, sometimes not, with the Nintendo Switch Lite. Um, Very comfy memories. Uh, you know, got the lights off, laying in bed, playing these different games, just having the time of my life. Um, and that's something I can say about a lot of different consoles and a lot of different games, but that doesn't make any of the individual experiences less special for me. I continue to feel that passion burning in my heart, so much so that I need to talk about it for almost 40 minutes.